Good evening. Breaking news at this hour of documentary evidence that Attorney General Alberto Gonzales lied to the Senate yesterday when he repeatedly testified that 8 congressional leaders were not briefed in 2004 about the administration's domestic spy program, but rather about some other program. Our fifth story in the countdown, the dramatic revelation based on documents from the Bush administration's own Director of National Intelligence, obscuring what had already been the first vote charging criminal contempt of Congress since 1998 against 2 of the president's other senior staffers. Our interview with Senate Judiciary Committee Chair Patrick Leahy presently. First the new documents, then the contempt. Yesterday's testimony by Attorney General Gonzales to the Senate, specifically his references to the Gang of 8, the congressional leaders he claimed were given briefings about Justice Department dissent over, quote, other intelligence activities and not the so-called terrorist surveillance program in 2004. His out-of-left-field new account of that late-night trip he took to the hospital bedside of a heavily sedated Attorney General John Ashcroft. Congresswoman Jane Harman, a former member of that Gang of 8, saying she was unaware of other intelligence activities. Quote, the program had different parts, but there was only one program. Ms. Harman adding that Mr. Gonzales was selectively declassifying information to defend his own conduct. Senator Jay Rockefeller, the top Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, also disputing the Attorney General's account, saying that based on what he knows about it, he would have to say Mr. Gonzales has committed perjury. And tonight, the Associated Press saying it has obtained a May 17, 2006 memorandum, 4 pages in length, from the then Director of National Intelligence, John Negroponte, to the then Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, which details the White House briefing with the Gang of 8 on March 10, 2004, and which refers to, quote, the classification of the dates, locations, and names of members of Congress who attended briefings on the terrorist surveillance program, unquote, on March 10, 2004. Please remember exactly how Mr. Gonzales had contradicted that statement under oath yesterday.
The reason for the visit to the hospital center was about other intelligence activities. It was not about the terrorist surveillance program that the president announced to the American people.
More details from David Schuster in a moment. First, the preceding trouble with testimony. The House Judiciary Committee today voting contempt of Congress citations against White House Chief of Staff Josh Bolten and former counsel Harriet Miers for their refusal to testify about the firings of those 9 U.S. attorneys while citing claims of executive privilege. Committee Chairman John Conyers saying the panel had nothing to lose by advancing those citations to the full House because it could not allow presidential aides to flaunt congressional authority. The last ones found guilty of criminal contempt of Congress was a EPA official who went to jail for 3 months in 1983. The White House, however, denying that any authority is being flaunted.
We have a situation where there is an attempt to do something that's never been done in American history, which is to assail the concept of executive privilege, which hails back to the administration of George Washington, and in particular to use criminal contempt charges against the White House Chief of Staff and the White House Legal Counsel. Interestingly enough, nobody has cited or recited anything that they think they've been denied. Instead, there has been constantly, and it seems, a desire to provoke a confrontation.
Before Senator Leahy refutes that particular point, let's turn to our correspondent in Washington, David Schuster. Good evening, David.
Good evening, Keith.
Bolten and Miers in a moment. First, flesh out this Gonzales story and the development. The Attorney General testified under oath to the Senate yesterday about this 2004 briefing. It wasn't about the terrorist surveillance program. And there was already a memo in the Speaker's file from the Director of National Intelligence saying it was. How much trouble is the Attorney General in?
This is a really, really big deal and a big problem for Gonzales, Keith. I had been speaking with a legal expert earlier tonight and reading back the way that Gonzales was facing the question from Schumer, the way he responded, the fact that he was given an opportunity to correct himself, and Gonzales repeatedly said it was about other intelligence activities. But the fact that there's now documentary evidence, never mind the testimony of these members of Congress who were there, but documentary evidence that in fact this meeting was about the terrorist surveillance program, or TSP, and there you have Gonzales flatly saying no, it was not. I mean, the legal expert I spoke with tonight said that just based on the documentary evidence that might exist, which we now know does exist, this is a clear case of perjury and that it's not even close. And so now the question is whether Democrats want to call for a special prosecutor and say, look, a U.S. attorney needs to bring this to a grand jury, seek an indictment. Of course, because Gonzales is in charge of the Justice Department, he should be recusing himself. But the question is, will Democrats demand a special prosecutor at this point?
Now, he can review his testimony. They give all witnesses the option to review and revise But assuming that that doesn't happen, they must think, the administration must think under these circumstances that there's wiggle room here. They asked him this question umpteen times yesterday. Is there any idea what the out would be other than revising the testimony?
Well, and tonight, Gonzalez, a spokesman, is saying that he stands by his testimony that this was not about the terror surveillance program, this March 2004 meeting. So the only thing that they could do now is they could, I suppose, suggest that this administration document was wrong, that perhaps the document misidentified what the meeting was about, but then you have a correction that stands in contrast with what members of Congress are saying. Or the only thing that Gonzalez could then do, I suppose, is tomorrow he could say, you know what, I did make a mistake. I was thinking about another meeting, and here's my corrected testimony. But that makes the point for members of Congress who say that every time this guy testifies, he says something that's not true. I mean, this is a really big deal, according to legal experts.
Or it makes the other point, David, which is that there's another surreptitious spying program that the Attorney General thinks was discussed that day, which is an entirely different set of oil cans catching fire.
Yeah, that nobody else knows about because members of Congress say they haven't been briefed on any of that. So.
All right. In the other, what was the lead story until about an hour ago, what specifically in the House are Mr. Bolton and Ms. Myers being accused of? Because Congressman Conyers put out this 52-page laundry list of possible offenses committed by the administration. You could argue that might be a little short. What part of it actually pertains to what they did not say?
Well, the contempt citation is related to the White House with Myers and Bolton refusing to provide testimony and documents related to the firing of these federal prosecutors. As it stands, lawmakers have already collected evidence from the Justice Department that suggests a high level of White House involvement in the firings, and that Bush advisor Karl Rove was among the first officials to suggest the firing. So Congress is convinced that Myers' testimony could add to the level of detail, and that the White House documents, which essentially are under the purview of the Chief of Staff Bolton, would also help provide a complete picture. However, just based on what Congress has been able to get so far, Congressman Conyers has found evidence that White House and Justice Department officials in firing the prosecutors violated federal statutes that protect civil service employees. And Conyers has also found evidence that suggests Justice Department and White House officials then sought to cover up what they had done by obstructing justice and giving false testimony and statements to Congress. And again, Democrats say that they need access to these White House documents to determine what the full picture is, and they're essentially holding the White House officials in contempt for refusing to provide these documents and testimony.
If they get them, I just have this vision of a constant, unbroken chain of couriers going back and forth from the White House to Congress and to the Senate. MSNBC's David Schuster in Washington. And as always, David, great thanks, and I'm sure we'll hear more about this from you tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Just when the reputation of the Attorney General looked like it could not get any worse, first came yesterday's appearance before Senate and tonight's revelation of Bush administration documents, evidently showing him up as a liar. Earlier this evening, I spoke with Senate Judiciary Committee Chair Patrick Leahy about what steps should be taken in light of the administration's continued stonewalling and secrecy, and our conversation taking place shortly before the Associated Press revealed it had the memo from the Director of National Intelligence. Senator Leahy, thank you for your time tonight.
Happy to be with you.
The latest account from Attorney General Gonzalez about his late-night trip to the hospital bedside of the then Attorney General John Ashcroft, Congresswoman Harman has summed it up. That he seemed to selectively declassify information to defend himself. Do you agree with that assessment?
I do. I also advised it very strongly, as did at least one other member of the committee, that he wants to look at the transcript of what he said and let us know if that's really the answers he wants to stand by. Senator Rockefeller, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, feels it's not accurate. I've actually sent the transcript over to the Intelligence Committee and told them to take a look at it. Former Democratic leader Tom Daschle, who was at the meetings of the so-called Gang of Eight, he says it's not what he remembered at all. And I'm wondering, we pushed him very strongly on this. Many people who had been briefed, in fact, members of our committee or on the Intelligence Committee, seemed rather amazed at the answers.
Senator Rockefeller, you mentioned, actually went a little further than that. He said he believes Mr. Gonzalez may have been possibly committed perjury with that answer regarding the hospital visit. Do you think a perjury investigation might be in order at this point?
Well, I've asked him to look at the transcript and get back to us. Our normal practice, if you testify, you get the transcript. You're given at least a reasonable time, a few days, to look at it. If you find you've made some glaring mistakes, send us that in writing. saying what the mistakes were. The last time Mr. Gonzalez came and testified, about 75 to 80 times, he said, I don't remember, I don't know, or I can't answer. On the few things he answered, we then got a very long letter from him saying, I want to correct my answers in this, this, and this position. If there are no corrections, and if it turns out that there were inaccuracies in there, I remind him this was under oath. I will refer to the Inspector General, take whatever action he thinks should be taken.
How can ultimately, though, the Senate and the House, either or both, do anything about the Attorney General under these circumstances between the two branches of the government at the moment? Can you create an Office of Special Prosecutor in this case? Could the Senate, could the House impeach Mr. Gonzalez?
Technically, we could. This would take really until he's going to be out of office anyway. I find it amazing. I cannot imagine, I've been here with 6 administrations, I can't imagine any president, Democratic or Republican, who would keep an Attorney General like this, even keep them on. I've said to people, this apparently is the way President Bush wants to be remembered in the history books. I'm a former prosecutor. We have a lot of former prosecutors on my Judiciary Committee. They're rather attracted to being on the committee. Every one of them, Republican and Democratic, has said they would never allow this in a prosecutor in their office. This is an administration that talks big talk on law and order, and they've done more to undermine law enforcement, especially law enforcement in this country, than any president I've seen in almost 34 years here in the Senate.
In response to the criminal contempt charges from the House Judiciary Committee today, the White House Press Secretary, Mr. Snow, not only made the claim that nobody has cited or recited anything that they think they've been denied from the White House, he also is accusing Congress of provoking a confrontation with the White House. From your vantage point as chairman of Senate Judiciary, do you agree with Mr. Snow's assessment?
Oh, of course not, and nobody agrees, but he's putting the best face on. I guess that's the job you're supposed to do as press secretary. But we've all subpoenaed a number of things involving the firings of the U.S. attorneys, a number of things that in all likelihood show improper manipulation of law enforcement. They haven't given them to us. In fact, I'll give you one example. When we subpoenaed the accounts that Karl Rove and others had used with the Republican National Committee, they weren't even running it through the White House in their email accounts. They said, well, that's all been erased, so there's nothing there to give. When I suggested that, of course, you can't erase emails like that, I was practically ridiculed by the White House press office for suggesting that. Then, lo and behold, guess what happened? They found they had them, 66,000 emails from one person, tens of thousands from another that we've asked for. But now they say, oops, we do have them, but we still don't want to give them to you. I mean, this is wrong. This is wrong. They're actually breaking the law on the Official Records Act.
Lastly, Senator, I can't resist this. It's not serious news, but it sure seems seriously symbolic. The new Stephen Hayes biography of the Vice President, Mr. Cheney's version of the ill-fated photo moment with you in 2004 contained therein. Let me just read this. The Vice President says, this is Hayes quoting him, Leahy came over and put his arm around me, and he didn't kiss me, but it was so close to it. So I flashed and told him I dropped the F-bomb on him. It was heartfelt, unquote. Any reaction to that account, sir?
Well, you know, if Mr. Hayes had intended to write a serious story other than a puff piece about the vice president, he would have actually picked up the phone and called me and asked me what happened, or called any one of the several senators that were standing there. What actually happened, every vice president since I've been here has made a point when they come on the Senate floor to go over and talk to senators on both sides of the aisle. The idea being that you might build up some goodwill for whoever is president. Dick Cheney never does. He only stands on the Republican side. So I walked over. I thought, well, maybe he's being shy. I said, Dick, you know, you can come on over and talk to the Democrats too. We won't, we won't bite you. And he reacted as he was described. He reacted. The irony, Keith, is that the Republican senators who were there are the ones who told the press about it. They were so shocked. I didn't say anything to anybody about it. In fact, this is the first time I think publicly I've stated exactly what happened. But the man who wrote this book, as most people have acknowledged, it was intended to be favorable to the vice president. That's why he spent time with him. If he really cared, he would have talked to any one of the senators, Republican senators who were there, or talked to me to get the real story.
Apparently just one side of it is bad enough from the vice president's point of view. And not just a president, but a vice president challenging imagination and challenging it in both parties.
Well, of course, he's the fourth branch of government, apparently.
Apparently, or a different state. Senate Judiciary Committee Chair Pat Leahy, great thanks for some of your time tonight, sir.
Good to be with you.